I am sure all of us sort of identify with the three readings we have just heard. They all point to one thing, one common reality we are all too familiar with. The first reading from Sirach tells us, wrath and anger are both hateful things. And in counsel, he tells us, reminds us, remember death and dying and decay. Hate not your neighbor. That is very real and true to life, because who among us didn't hate? Who among us didn't get angry? At some point or other in our life, we do get angry. We get angry with people who park their cars because they have more than yours, and they park it right next to your driveway. We get angry with tricycle drivers who charge special rates even if you're only going to SM from Pure Gold. We get angry with government. We get angry even with the church. We are disappointed too by pastors who are meant to be serving us. But then Sirach tells us like it is. Remember death and decay. Remember your end. And probably knowing and remembering the end, we might make an adjustment or two about how we act and how we behave. In the second reading, we are reminded why we should remember death and decay. And the second reading tells us because no one lives for himself alone, even as no one dies for oneself. And one poet, I can't remember his name right now, pens it this way: all of us, near or far, to each other linked are, that never does a leaf fall on the ground without troubling a star. All of us near or far to each other linked are, that never does a leaf fall on the ground without troubling a star. This is the reality about us. Whether or not you're aware of what goes on in the Ukraine, we are affected. The price of petrol is going up again, and there is no end in sight. The supply chain all over the world is disturbed. China is no longer the manufacturing center of the world because they have learned from Philippine labor sector that is very militant, and they always, pushed as they are by ideologues, they always ask for more. When Deng Xiaoping was alive, the minimum wage in China was 35 pesos a day, until they learned the trick of being politicized, ideologized, and ruled by ideology in the Philippine labor sector. We are among the most noisy labor sectors in the world. And yet, did life get better for us? Inflation was the end result, and up until now, inflation goes out of control. So no one lives and dies for oneself. We are all interconnected with one another. So if we hate a neighbor in secret, you can bet your bottom dollar that affects the community in the long run. If your priest hates some of the parishioners, you can rest assured that pastoral ministry will be affected. Anger has a way of even, like water looking for its own level. It does have a way of affecting us. In the gospel, it doesn't matter whether your version is 7 or 77 or 70 times 7 or 77 times 7 times. It's all the same. It's a symbol. 7 being a number of perfection, it means that 7 and multiples of 7 will always have to do with only forgiveness, no limits. And there are anti-Catholics who keep on saying that 666 is the Roman Pontiff, the Pope in Rome. They should study a little bit more biblical science, because 6 is minus 7 minus 1. And if 7 is a number of perfection, 6 is the opposite. It's the number of imperfection. And if you repeat it 3 times, that's even worse. Anything repeated 3 times is the ultimate. It does not refer to a person. It can refer to any one of us when we lack perfection, when we lack the minimum that we ought to be doing. So the Lord tells us in a bit of exaggerated manner, how many times must I forgive? So asked Peter, as many as 7 times? That's good enough, 7 is a number of perfection. But the Lord even made it better. I say to you, not 70 times, but 77 times. Only forgiveness. Now, reality check. I don't need to remind you that we all hurt each other. We get offended with one another. Every single day. If you are husbands and wife, you know very well you're not perfect. So one gets up on the left side of the bed, the other wants to get up on the right side of the bed. And sometimes our ways that are, settled quite in place by force of habit, it can wreak havoc to relationships. And you know very well that that toothpaste tube can be a cause for war when you don't roll the tube and just keep on pressing, and the other one is obsessive compulsive and wants to roll it all the way up to the top. We all hurt one another. And the reality is that 80 or 90 years after Hitler killed 6 million Jews and Catholics, there are Catholic priests whom Hitler killed because they never agreed with him. 90 years after Hitler, we see another one and another one. What do you call those water cannons and laser guns being pointed at poor fishermen? Isn't that hatred? Isn't that aggression? Isn't that violence? 90 years after Hitler, we have 2 or 3 of them forming a club. And the reality is that the world is nowhere near to peace than it ever was when our Blessed Lady of Fatima showed herself in an apparition that talked about peace in the world and to pray for the conversion of Russia. And up until now, we still need to pray for Russia because they want to put back the Soviet Empire like Hitler did 90 years ago. Anger and hatred are real. And there are so many angry people every day. Just look at Doña Soledad. The traffic every day makes you angry, and everybody's angry. And everybody's angry at SM for the extension of SM Bikutan that caused floods during Typhoon Goring, like as if SM were the only cause of it. But we also, every time we order from Shopee and Lazada, a 300 peso worth thing that we order comes wrapped in plastic, and then it's put in a plastic bag, and then it's wrapped in plastic bubble wrap, and then it's put in another plastic. A 300 peso worth of something is wrapped in very expensive to ecology, wrapping materials that cause flooding and cause so many. We are the number 3 producer of plastic trash in the world, next to China and Indonesia. And in case the Vietnamese do not know, you're number 4. So we belong to the same club. So we are facing a reality that causes anger and disappointment. But then today you came here not to hear bad news. You came here because you believe in good news. And the good news is this: if anger and hatred are real, but so too is the goodness and forgiveness and compassion and mercy of God. The Lord God, a forgiving and merciful God, rich in kindness and fidelity. That was what we answered after the first reading. When we were told, remember death and decay, hate not your neighbor, we are told of the ultimate that we should work for. And that is the reality about the God we love, the God we want to be with, the God we worship. And what else is the good news? No matter how difficult, forgiveness is possible. One of my counselees many years ago was a middle-aged man who came to me distressed because, like the story of a prophet in the Old Testament, his wife betrayed him and ran away with somebody else, and then a few years after came back, and the man was distraught, and he was torn between forgiveness and absolute hatred. And in the process of counseling, at some point, the grace of God touched him. And one day he blurted out, I choose to forgive. He was crying and in tears, and at that point, I too was in tears. Why? Because for a man to forgive an unfaithful wife is something almost unheard of. It is the most difficult thing, but he made it. He did it. Forgiveness, though difficult, is possible. And today the gospel sounds like a bad story, a bad short story. It talks about the parable of the artless servant. And he owed a big sum of money to his rich master. And when it was time for payback, he said, be patient with me, sir. Give me some more time. And the forgiving master let him go. But then coming out of the rich man's mansion, he saw a fellow servant who owed him 100 pesos. Anong ginawa niya? Sinakal, sinihil, nagmalabis sa kapwa niyang tagapaglingkod na nakakautang ng sa 100 piso. Maliit na halaga. Cognitive dissonance. This is who we are. This is a story of who we are when we expect God to forgive us, but we cannot forgive those who offend us. There is a gap between what we expect God to do for us and what we expect ourselves to do. Therefore, the gospel, more than just saying a story that is disappointing, is really a challenge. And in place of the challenge, what do we get? We are called, we get what? More responsibility. You know, if you're a couple and you're out hating one another, just living in the same roof, under the same roof, but living in the different rooms, and you cannot get your act together, you will destroy each other in no time. If you are a family who hate one another because of inheritance that you are fighting for with tooth and nail, then you live in hell. If we are a society that always is angry at everything and everyone, then that society is inhuman. And what is the good news that we need to bring home? We are called to humanize the world. We are called to do a little better than Putin and Xi Jinping. We are called to resist evil in all its forms, but by not becoming evil ourselves, by hating and being angry. We are all called to humanize the world because the Lord our God is a God of mercy and compassion, rich in kindness and fidelity. And this is what we are after here. We come to Mass because we are weak, we are angry, we could be unforgiving, we could be a pain in the neck for other people. And today, for a little fleeting hour, we want to gather together to extol the greatness, the mercy, the compassion of a God who is close to us, a God whom we should imitate. No matter how little, no matter how difficult it may be, we are called to humanize the world.